Welcome back to another episode of Coach Steve Show podcast. It was a wild weekend in college football for our week 6. One of the biggest games that happened this week, of course, was the Alabama versus the Texas A&M Aggies. Coach Saban's undefeated record against his former assistant football coaches is now over as he sits 24-1 after a close loss 41-38 against Texas A&M and one of his former assistant coaches from many moons ago, Jimbo Fisher. The question is, how did Texas A&M pull off this win versus the Tide after they come off a very tough loss against Mississippi State and losing their starting quarterback at the beginning of the season? We'll discuss all of that, and I will even go after the Alabama haters, all right here on the Coach Steve Show. Please hit the subscribe button, the like button on the YouTube channel, which is, of course, the Coach Steve Show YouTube channel. Please follow the podcast on Apple and Spotify. You can get your podcast or this podcast wherever you listen to your podcast. Pandora, iHeartRadio, all that stuff. You hit the follow button, leave it a review and all that. It will let you know when a new episode drops for our weekly episodes. Yes, weekly episodes almost every day during the week. Please also find the podcast on the Belly Up Sports Podcast Network. If you go to bellyupsports.com, you can find this podcast there. And also subscribe to the Belly Up Podcast YouTube channel. You can find podcasts on there anywhere. Check out all that other content on the Belly Up Sports Podcast Network. Betting season is in full swing. The Belly Up Sports Podcast and the Coach Steve Show are now working with Bet Us. You heard that right, Bet Us. It's a great place for sports betting and casino betting. So wherever you want to, any type of gambling you want to do on sports, blackjack, poker, anything else like that, you need to check out Bet Us. If you use the link in the description for Bet Us-Belly Up Sports, you click on that link and then use this code when you sign in, join 25, you will get a 125% signing bonus and a $1 deposit. So if you use the code in the description, the Bet Us-Belly Up Sports, and the code JOIN25, you'll get 125% sign-up bonus. 100% of that's going to match your deposit and go for sports betting. 25% of that deposit is going to go to casino betting. So now you get two perfect worlds. You can go bet on any type of sports, baseball, basketball, football, college football, and then take the other 25% and go play some blackjack. Who doesn't like free money? And who doesn't want to go win money? So we use the code in the description, use the code JOIN25, and get 125% sign-up bonus with $100 minimum deposit. $100 of that's going to go to sports betting. 25% is going to go to casino betting. And please go check out all the other affiliates in the description below. So we're just going to dive right into this episode of the Coach Steve Show. We're not going to talk about much or many teams. It goes without saying, Alabama is the best of the best. When you think of college football, you think of Nick Saban and Alabama. This year, Clemson has kind of fallen off, so one of the last true blue bloods of the past few years is Alabama. When you're Alabama and you win year in and year out, you win a championship for 2 years in a row, or every other year you're making it to the title game every year. You're going to get everyone's best shot. Everyone's best shot, no matter who you play. They could go play a Division III school, and that Division III school is going to give Alabama everything they've got. Texas A&M came into this game after losing to Mississippi State and Coach Leach, which is a good football team. Coach Leach is one of the best college football coaches in the nation. They lost their starting quarterback near the beginning of the year. They were playing with their backup quarterback. So on paper, you're looking at both teams. You think Alabama just going to come in and win. That is never the case in sports, and especially college football. You are going to get everybody's best shot. Everybody. And so at some point, a team is going to get you. Now, did I think it was going to be Texas A&M that came in and was going to get Alabama? Absolutely not. When you look at Alabama's schedule coming into the year, to me, there were two teams that were probably going to get Alabama, in my opinion. If you want to say Texas A&M as the third, that's fine. But Florida and Ole Miss, and the only reason why I say is because Florida has much improved. And that's just a game that Florida gets up for ever since the Tim Tebow days. And then Ole Miss, just because of Lane Kiffin being the offensive mind that he is, and because of how the game went last year. Texas A&M only because of the season they had last year, going 11-2. But you don't have your same quarterback coming into this year. So for me, that was not one of the cases. So looking at Alabama's schedule, if they could get by Florida and Ole Miss, the only other time you might see them slip up, maybe, because we didn't know what was going to happen with these teams, it was maybe Auburn, because Auburn gives Alabama problems. So going by those teams, you would think Alabama's on a way to an undefeated season. They're not playing Georgia. They probably won't see them to the national or the SEC championship game, but they're going to get their best shots. This game was a great game from the start to finish. This is exactly what you look for in college football. This is exactly what you look for in an SEC game. David's trying to take down Goliath. I do think in the back of Jimbo Fisher's mind, even though none of these coaches want to admit it, that record, because you see ESPN, that's all they want to talk about is the record versus assistant coaches. He's 24-0 against assistants. That's one of them. I guarantee there's this little pool of like, we got to get him now. Does this loss go into Nick Saban's legacy? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. He's still the best college football coach of all time. Probably the second best football coach of all time. Just because people want to say Bill Belichick is because it's the NFL, but that's a different podcast for a different time. So when you go into a game like this, you're going to get everybody's best shot. Jimbo Fisher wants to come in and say he beat Coach Saban, his former boss. He wants his players to say they took down the number one team in the nation, even though people think Georgia is the number one team in the nation. Alabama did lose some players from last year, NFL players, offensive linemen, defensive linemen. They lost their quarterback, lost the running back, lost a couple wide receivers. In Alabama, people say that their weakness is we're going to be up front. I think be able to run the ball and certain passing. How are they going to handle? Are they going to be able to make the big explosive throws that they did before? Are they going to be able to run the ball? Is the offensive line going to hold up? But the big question mark for Alabama coming into the season for a lot of people was their defensive line. Is it going to be able to hold up? They're not as big as previous Alabama defensive lines. Now, to me, you don't have to be big in order to play well. The only time you're going to run into problems when you go up against an offensive line that's very veteran, and they're big and they're fast. All five across the board. When you have a smaller defensive line and you're going up against an offensive line that has one or two big, fast offensive linemen, you can move people around, put them in good positions, put up maybe your worst defensive lineman against their worst offensive lineman, and hopefully your guy, because they play for Alabama and they have perfect technique, are going to be able to win. But up until now, the only time we saw that sort of weakness in Alabama was against Florida. Florida's offensive line did a good job. Their defensive line did a good job. And they were 3 points away from winning that game. We haven't seen it since. Coming into this game, knowing that a bright spot for Texas A&M. They have a struggling quarterback. They lose to Mississippi State, but one bright spot. As much as I'm not a fan of Jimbo Fisher, you have a veteran coach that's been around. He's won a national title. Even though I'm not a fan of his, he had the success. I can't hide from that. You have a big offensive line that can come in and just push people around. That's a bright spot. So when you have those, you have a couple athletes at wide receiver. You actually have a pretty decent defensive line as well, saying we're just going to leave it all on the field. We're going to give them their best shot. For you people that are all about stats, stats do not tell the story of every game. People like to look at stats, especially ESPN people. Well, when you look at the paper and you look at stats, this says this or this says this, especially in the NBA. But we're not in the NBA. This is football. This is a tougher sport. This is a collision sport. This takes more game planning, takes more practice preparation, takes a lot of players to come together and do things together. So on paper, when you look at this, if you didn't watch the game, yes, Texas A&M was 41-38. So you automatically think if you look at the paper, Texas A&M numbers are going to jump out at you. But in all reality, when you look at Alabama, when you look at just stats, you're thinking they should have won this game. Because when you look at Alabama had 522 total yards versus Texas A&M's 379 yards. Passing for Alabama was 369 yards for Texas A&M's 285. Rushing, Alabama had 153 yards. Texas A&M had 94. When you look at time of possession, Alabama held the ball for 33 minutes and 39 seconds. Texas A&M held the ball for 26 minutes and 21 seconds. Alabama had 25 first downs compared to Texas A&M's 24 first downs. Nobody went for it on fourth down. So when you look on paper, Bryce Young, 28 of 48 for 369 yards and 3 touchdowns. But you look at Calzada, he had 285 yards to 3 touchdowns. Robinson for Alabama had 24 carries for 147 rushing yards. Spiller only had 46 yards and a touchdown on 17 carries. Jay Williams for Alabama had 146 yards receiving and 2 touchdowns. So when you look on paper, you think that Alabama won this game. But that's the great thing about sports and the great thing about football. And some of you guys got to open up your ears and actually listen to me, not just hear me. You got to listen. Games are not won on paper. You don't look at it and say, well, they had this many yards. That's never the case. Stats never tell the story. Texas A&M offensive line really showed up to play. They're big, they're physical, and they can move. I have to give credit to Jim. Game plan was pretty simple for Texas A&M. We're going to protect the quarterback at all costs because Alabama's going to dial up a defense. They're going to play their 3-4 defense, but they're also going to jump into a 4-2-5 look, which is kind of like a 3-4. You just walk a guy down, now you got 4 linemen. They stay in that 3-man front. They might give you a 3. Alabama's going to play multiple defenses. They're going to stunt. They're going to slant really hard and bring a backer off the other side. They're going to loop a guy in, loop another guy out, then bring a backer right up the middle. Their corners and safeties are going to be very physical. They're going to bump. They're going to hit. They're going to gain tackle. They're going to go after the ball. Jimbo Fisher comes out and says, okay, we have a good offensive line that can run block, but to help them out with these pressures, we're going to get dialed up. We're going to keep a running back into block. We're going to keep a tight end into block. We're going to motion people. We're going to fake the motion and hand the ball off. We're going to run pick routes to try to combat their man defense that they're good at. We're going to take short slant routes and hitches to help our young quarterback who's kind of struggling right now to get him into a rhythm. They're going to take what they give them. They want short, medium routes. And then eventually going into the second half, you'll start to get your deeper routes when you start chipping and diming for short routes and medium routes. And so what I mean by that is slants, hitches, a dig route, quick out routes, a curl route in the middle of the field to combat when they go too high. Jimbo Fisher understands what Alabama's going to do and what Nick Saban's going to do. Now, does Nick Saban do what he always did way back when Jimbo worked for him? No. But coaching against him for so long, understanding kind of what he wants to do, all the film, and as much of a fan, as not of a fan, as I am of Jimbo Fisher, credit has to be given where credit is due for how long he's been coaching in college football. So the game plan was simple. And another thing Texas A&M really did a good job of was converting on short yard distances at the right time. So in the second half, we know when Alabama's coming back because Texas A&M was up 17-7 at the end of the first quarter. They had to take care of the football with only 1 turnover. They have to in the right moments. So in the second half, when it's 3rd and 1, 3rd and 2, 3rd and 3, they converted, which breaks the defensive spirit when you do that a couple times. When you look at Texas A&M's 3rd down conversion versus Alabama, 3rd down, Texas A&M was 4 of 10. Those four were very crucial. They were short distances. But what doesn't tell you on here is when it was second and short, second and long, or medium, they would come off on a big play and convert. This really breaks a defensive spirit, no matter who you are. If you're Alabama, if you've been Clemson, even if you're Georgia, it slowly eats away at you when an offense consistently does this. So Texas A&M was really converting with their simple game plan. They want to convert on the shorts and long, short distances and long distances, and they did. The quarterback really stepped up. So to make the game plan simple, 21 of 31 for Zach Calzada, 21 of 31 for 285 yards, 3 touchdowns. He only had the 1 interception, but he averaged 9.2. So the receivers, when you get these short passes, you have to make a move. You have to run with a purpose, and they did. They had a decent balanced rushing attack. Isaiah Spiller, 46 yards rushing. David Achane, I'm going to say his name wrong, 34 yards of rushing. Quarterback had 12 yards of rushing. Receivers, they had to spread it out. Smith for them, 85 yards. Jalen, 73 yards. 45 yards. Isaiah Spiller, running back, 43 yards. So when you're getting your running back involved in the short run game or swing routes, and they're able to make a move. Smith, he averaged 14.2 yards of completion or a catch, and he had 2 touchdowns. Jalen Weidermurner averaged 24.3 yards a catch out of his 3 catches. So when you hit nickel and dime, it opens up the deep routes, it opens up the medium routes. Special teams was huge in this game from both sides. Alabama blocks, returns it for a touchdown. They kick off. Texas A&M returns kickoff for a touchdown. The punt team was able to put Alabama deeper in their own territory than most. So special teams, in order for Texas A&M to win this game, they have to come in with some confidence. They have to come in with a good game plan. The offensive line has to show up, and they have to do something better than Alabama once or twice in all 3 phases of the game. So on defense, can they slow down Alabama or at least make them work for what they're getting and make it harder for them and come up and hit? Is their defensive line going to be able to combat Alabama's offensive line? Offensively, does their offensive line show up and run block? Does their offensive line pass protect? Does the offensive wide receivers catch the ball and move the ball? Does their quarterback stay calm in the pocket? Does he make good decisions? And on special teams, can they punt and really pin a team back and not let them get so many yards? When they kick off, can they keep them behind the 20? And can they make a big play on special teams, which they did? So in all 3 phases of the game, that's what Texas A&M needed to win. And a phrase I like to use if you listen, I always say, who blinks first? And what I mean by that is you stay on this path, and the moment you blink, the moment you look to the other side, you look to the right or to the left. If I look to the right in football, something changes on the left. Someone does something different. So what I mean by that is who flinches, who blinks, who makes a mistake, who misses a block, drops the ball, who doesn't execute. Does someone take a play off? Does a coach just dial something up that the other coach wasn't prepared for? And that's what happened with Texas A&M. They didn't blink. They played tough. I think that kick return was huge for them for this win. I think the early turnovers at the beginning of the game for Alabama when they turned the ball over, and Texas A&M marched down the field. Now it's 14-0, 14-7, 17-7 at the end of the first quarter. Alabama's defense just wasn't consistent up front. Their defensive line has been talked about. They're not as big as they usually are. Now, to me, that does not matter. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. It doesn't matter how big you are. It just matters how hard you play. How hard do you work out? How strong are you? I think Alabama's defensive line is pretty strong. But again, when you go up against a team that has 4 to 5 really big, strong offensive linemen, you are going to struggle because now you can't hide your defensive linemen anymore. So I give Jimbo Fisher credit for recruiting offensive linemen. That's kind of what Alabama's team was last year in the COVID year. Alabama had really good offensive line. They had big, strong offensive linemen. They got stronger as the year went on. Their strength and conditioning coaches put it out there. How much power was generated in the offensive line as the year had progressed? Texas A&M has an offensive line similar to that. So when people went up against Alabama, they couldn't hide their bad defensive linemen with the worst offensive lineman on the other side. Not saying Alabama's defensive line is bad at all. And I'm not saying Alabama is a bad team at all. Anybody that listens to our version, I am not embarrassed to wear my Alabama Crimson Tide gear today, recording this. And I'll get to the fans against Alabama here in a minute. But when you have an offensive line that's pretty good across the board, it's hard to take your quote-unquote worst defensive lineman and put them against their worst offensive lineman, or take your best defensive lineman and put on their worst offensive line, because there isn't. So Texas A&M's offensive line really double-teamed well. They were also able to block one-on-one with Alabama's defensive line to try to get to the backers to open up some of this run game. And most importantly, pass protect. They were able to pass off stunts. They were able to keep them in front, move their feet, and they were able to take time. They didn't have the time possession, but the time they did have the ball, they tried their best to keep Alabama's offense off the field. Alabama also just kind of missed too many tackles, like I said. When Texas A&M's wide receivers got the ball, they were running with a purpose. They were trying to break tackles. They were lowering their shoulder. They just played tough. And that's easy for me to say, but when you watch that game, and again, I am no Texas A&M fan. I am no Jimbo Fisher fan, but they played tough. And what I mean by tough is if anything went wrong, a penalty, a dropped ball, they didn't break this run, they got back to the line of scrimmage. They did not blink. It was on schedule as they prepared. Alabama had arm tackles. They were trying to lay the wood, those type of hits, and they would fail. But they just had too many tackles. And I said it again. They let Texas A&M convert on short downs, second downs, had a couple penalties. They allowed that kick return for a touchdown. But when you let them convert on second and medium downs, that eventually wears on a defense. There's a phrase called pounding the rock. Now, that's for running the ball. So you can say pound the rock or pound the stone. Where you just you take like a sledgehammer and you're hitting at the rock. It takes a while for that rock to break. But eventually it's going to start to crack. And eventually you're going to find a weakness. And you keep hitting at that weakness. And eventually the rock breaks. That's what Texas A&M was doing to Alabama. They were hitting at the rock. Alabama's a tough rock. Once it starts to chip and crack, they will attack that weakness. So when they were running hard, when the offensive line was playing well and pushing around the defense and said, we figured out how to do this, this is what was going to happen. So when you're converting second and medium or second and short, you are pounding at that rock. It's easy to once in a while hit a big play. Take that sledgehammer and bam, and hit it and get a nice chunk, big thing, but that's not always going to do it. When you take big, long hits, you're wasting a lot of energy, and it gives that rock an opportunity to come back at you. Boom, boom, short hits. You are going to wear down that rock, and that's what Texas A&M was doing, and Alabama let it happen. They weren't always as physical. They were missing some tackles, and Texas A&M's players were running through pretty well. That kick return for a touchdown was a huge momentum swing. That's just hard. When you do something better than the other team in all three phases of the game, and special teams being one of the biggest ones, it's hard to come back from that. Alabama's offensive line was just inconsistent blocking. They blocked pretty well to get the running back a lot of rush yards, allow Bryce Young to do his thing. But there were times that the pocket broke down. Thank goodness Bryce Young is athletic. He can move. But when the pocket breaks down and you're forcing a guy to throw on the run, I don't care who you are. It's tough to throw on the run. I don't care who you are. So hats off to Texas A&M. They just matched Alabama's physicality, hit by hit, blow by blow. When you are down 17-7 in the first quarter, it's tough to come back from that. Then in the second quarter, you allow them to score 7 points, and you only score 3. So now it's 24-10 a half. Texas A&M. You've put yourself in quite the hole. So now you have to come out and score points, which they did. Alabama comes out and scores 14 in the third and 14 in the fourth. When your offense scores 38 points, you're putting your team in a position to win. But when the defense is letting teams convert on very critical third and shorts, on very critical second, it's hard to come back from that. When Alabama gets passing yards and rush yards like they wanted, it's shocking to hear that they're going to lose a game. So hats off to Texas A&M to play a complete team game. The defense showed up. The offense showed up. Not saying the offense had this crazy amount of numbers, but I think they're okay with that. They were perfectly fine with what they were doing against them, and they just imposed their will at the line of scrimmage. It starts and ends up front. Up front plays well, you do well. When they don't play well, you really got to scheme to make life easier on the O-line up front. But that wasn't the biggest thing for me or the most frustrating. Haters are going to hate. Now, Coach Steve, you're kind of like a bandwagon fan. Alabama wins championship, blah, blah. So let me say this again. If you've listened to any old episodes, there's some teams I just like and I've slowly become fans of. And if you're a real football fan, you might buy shirts of that team, everything else. But from starting this podcast, become fans of coaches. I've been a fan of Nick Saban for years when I was in high school. Believe it or not, when I was really younger, you kind of watch him at LSU. You kind of saw it Miami. I've been following his career since then, and especially when he got to Alabama. And it's easy because they win. But I am a Nick Saban fan. So I've been a quote-unquote Crimson Tide fan. Now, I completely understand that people are tired of seeing Alabama be undefeated, lose a game, or just make it to the college football playoff year in and year out. I think only one time they haven't been in, but they're just tired of seeing them in the college football playoff and winning a national title. Now, the response is, well, then somebody beat them. Somebody beat them. I think some people out there that posted, oh, I hope Alabama loses. Oh, man, it'd just be really nice and good for college football if Alabama lost. Oh, sweet Jesus, please allow Texas A&M to pull this off. Some of you that post that, I think, genuinely just want to see something different. Not necessarily that they hate Nick Saban, not necessarily that they hate Alabama. I just think they want to see something different. And I completely understand that. And that's why I think that the committee should make the college football playoff different. Open it up to 12 teams, 16 teams, maybe just take the top 25 teams. Change the football playoff where we don't have this. But I've talked about that before, and that's a different podcast for a different time. But a lot of the haters are going against greatness, and I guess don't like greatness, I guess. Now, I am kind of a hypocrite when it comes down when you listen to me talk about LeBron James, but I think that's a little different. People, I guess, were just tired of seeing Alabama win. So some people out there saying, oh my gosh, Alabama this, Alabama that, thank God they lost, blah, blah, blah. We just need to sit back and enjoy what's going on in front of us. Yes, maybe I should do that with LeBron James, and maybe I should take my own advice. But I think there's a difference between wishing a team to lose rather than a person. Now, if you want Nick Saban to lose because you just don't like the way he talks, the way he coaches, understand. I fully understand that, and I respect it. But we can't really sit back and be mad at Alabama as a program and those kids and players that fully make it to the game, championship game all the time. Now, if after the game you said, man, the only reason why I'm glad they lost because it's going to shave up college football, I respect that. But just how some of you were going about wishing ill will on Alabama, I think some don't do it out of hate. I think some do like Alabama's offense. But I guess out of all of that, that's fine. That's been said for Alabama for a long time. One thing I didn't understand was people going after Bill O'Brien. Now, Bill O'Brien has big shoes to fill. He's coming into Alabama. Coach Sarkisian had a big shoes to fill when Lane Kiffin left to call that offense. Sarkisian had his twists on it, but they ran a pretty good offense. If you look at Alabama's offense under Bill O'Brien, it looks rather similar. But if people don't know this because they don't watch Alabama like I do, when you go back and watch the spring game and you listen to Nick Saban talk about Bill O'Brien, he said, we have a system. We know what we're going to do. And Bill O'Brien's going to run what we want to do. He'll have his own twists on it. There'll be some things we haven't done in years past. But we know what we want to do. Nick Saban's all in on the spread offense, to run the ball or pass the ball or to be up-tempo. He's even come out and said he doesn't understand huddling anymore. He understands it at times, but he doesn't understand why a team huddles all the time, even though they did it when he first got there for many, many years. But Nick Saban, the reason why he's the greatest of all time is he's able to adapt and to understand what a no-huddle system does for you when you get those type of athletes. So people come after Bill O'Brien and says, man, I wish he would have dialed things up in the first half like he did the second half. Well, to some of you, he did. They just turned the ball over. That interception hurt them. Texas A&M, we've already talked about the defense versus the offense. That hurt them. Bryce Young had 369 yards passing. You had Brian Robinson Jr. have 147 yards rushing. Your receiving group, Jameis Williams, 146 yards receiving. John Mechie III, 88. Brian Robinson, the running back, he himself had 60 yards. What do you mean you want Bill O'Brien to dial it up more? So that part I didn't understand. The blame Bill O'Brien for this loss. You score 38 points. Now, to some people, you may have to score 40 or 50. In my eyes, you score 38. You give yourself a chance to win the game. Now, they're going to take the blame on everybody. Nick Saban's going to blame all three phases. So for some people to come out and say Bill O'Brien should have dialed it up more, what are you talking about? Like Shannon Sharp tweeted out, man, Bill O'Brien should have done this or should have done that. Well, Shannon Sharp, you are an NFL Hall of Famer. That does not mean you can coach. So some of you like him and others that wanted Bill O'Brien to quote unquote dial it up more. He did. Go back and watch the play calling. Stuff was there. Give Texas A&M, you're taking credit away from Texas A&M, which I don't want to do. Give Texas A&M a lot of credit. They exposed some of Alabama's weaknesses that Alabama's going to have to pay attention to. But one thing we know is Nick Saban does not stay down for long. One thing we do know, Alabama does lose a game most of the time in the regular season. They can't afford to lose two. When they lose two, they go play Michigan in the Outback Bowl. They cannot afford to lose another game. And sometimes when they lose a game, it's later on in the year. But they do lose a game to somebody necessarily that they don't always need to lose to. Sometimes it's Auburn, LSU. But they do lose a game. So I don't think it's quite time to hit the panic button. When we look at Alabama's remaining schedule, unfortunately, they will play at Mississippi State next week versus one of my favorite coaches of all time and Coach Mike Leach. I feel bad for Coach Leach because he's going to have to get up pissed off Alabama. But you play them, Tennessee, struggling LSU, New Mexico State, Arkansas, and then Auburn. So the schedule is favored for them to win the rest of their games. And I think they will. No offense to Coach Leach. That game's going to be hard to root for. I may not be able to root for it much. But the rest of their schedule, Tennessee, LSU, New Mexico State, now Arkansas would be a tough one, and Auburn, which is always tough because Auburn's always been a pain, and Coach Nick Saban's backside. Their schedule is set up to be undefeated, which I think they will. I think they can win out, and I think they're going to see Georgia on the other side. That's going to be a huge game. So the only way Alabama does not make the playoff is if they lose to that SEC championship game. So the difference this year and then most is that when Alabama usually loses their game, it's either near the end of the season, and then they can win, and they win the SEC championship game, or they lose the SEC championship game, and that's their one loss, and then they put the SEC champion into the playoff, and when your only loss is to that person, they make it. Same thing happened with Georgia before and Alabama before. So right now, I think they can make it to the SEC title and play Georgia. Right now, Georgia is the number one team in the country. So for you guys that were going after the hate of Alabama and going after Bill O'Brien, you need to take a step back and realize stuff was there. It was just allowing Texas A&M offense to do things that Alabama doesn't let teams do, but it's not time to panic. Sometimes it's good to lose this game and reflect on how you lost so you can fix it. And no one's better at that than Nick Saban. They're going to fix it. It's going to be fine. But they cannot slip up anymore. You have to put their... And with their strength and conditioning to get that defense stronger than what it started, they are going to be fine. But some of the hate needs to take a step back. And I do have to give credit to Texas A&M when credit is due. This wraps up our talk with Alabama and Texas A&M. Haters going to hate, and that's fine. Again, please like and subscribe to the Coach Steve Show YouTube channel. Be a part of this podcast. Be a part of what's going on. Comment down below. Different stuff you want to talk about, what you want to see on the podcast, your thoughts on different things. Check out all the social medias on Twitter, the Facebook page, all of that. Go check out the affiliates in the description below. Thank you guys so much for listening. Again, please check out the weekly episodes. Yes, weekly. Check out the Belly Up Sports podcast.com. Check out their YouTube channel as well and subscribe. And I will see you guys next time. This has been another episode of the Coach Steve Show podcast.